Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez announced that he will not seek re-election in the 2023 presidential elections. And the Chinese government urged the Western powers not to interfere in Moscow and Beijing relations. Clashes intensify in Sudan between the army and the rapid reaction forces as preliminary death toll amount to 600 people and thousands wounded. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. On Friday, Argentina's President Alberto Fernandez announced that he will not seek re-election in the 2023 presidential elections. In a video posted on his social media platforms, Fernandez reviewed his work at the helm of Argentina during his presidency and revealed that he will not run for re-election. On the eve of the first meeting on the Justicialist Party seeking to define the electoral setup of the ruling party agreed for this Friday, the president advanced his definition that La Cámpora, an Argentine left-wing political youth organization supporting the leftist powers in the nation, had been demanding. Now, Fernandez seeks to present himself as the coordinator of the electoral strategy of the Frente de Todos from his position as head of the party. In his message, the president expressed that as a militant of Peronism, he always knew that homeland comes first, then the movement, and lastly the personal interests. The president of Brazil, Luiz Lula da Silva, arrived in Lisbon, capital of Portugal, in his first official trip to Europe since he took office. The Brazilian Foreign Ministry, through a press release, highlighted that the trip is part of the relaunching of the diplomatic relations of the South American giant with its main partners, as it happened recently with his trip to China. The Brazilian president will begin his official agenda on Saturday with a meeting to discuss trade agreements between the European Union and the countries of the Southern Common Market. Lula da Silva, as a final stop of his Europe trip, will travel to Spain to participate in a seminar with business persons. He also has scheduled to meet in Spain with King Felipe VI, or Philip VI, and Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. And Spain awaits with great interest the official visit of the president of Brazil, Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva, who arrived on Friday in Portugal at the beginning of his European tour. According to diplomatic sources in Madrid and the Royal House Communications Office, Brazil's influence as one of the major Latin American countries and the weight of its economy and trade aroused Spain's interest in view of the proximity of its 6-month presidency of the European Union, started on July the 1st. King Philip VI and the Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez will be the main hosts of the Brazilian president, who seeks to consolidate ties with Spain with the signing of several agreements focused on the advancement of bilateral ties. The agenda will also include issues of global interest, such as the future role of Madrid at the head of the EU on the eve of a summit with the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, and Brussels on July 17th and 18th. In Brazil, despite a series of political victories, the Lula administration is still facing challenges to move forward on its agenda. In Brasilia, our correspondent Ryan Meir has more.
During his first 100 days in office, Brazil's President Lula has delivered on 1/3 of his campaign promises. But his Workers' Party only controls 13% of the seats in Congress. In order to push through any new law or project, he needs the votes of hundreds of more conservative lawmakers. So far, there have been several victories, but things are moving slower than some voters expected.
Unfortunately, this Congress is an expression of the Brazilian society and the situation it is in. We are in a moment of extreme social conflict. A group of right-wing extremists has formed in our country. Unfortunately, it is a right-wing extremism that has been formed by a lot of disinformation.
Meanwhile, a small but vocal minority of lawmakers works to start arguments and fabricate scandals on the floor of Congress to slow down voting processes and chip away at support from centrist politicians for the government's agenda.
Logically, these congressmen from the political center have no simple change course and are now in 100% support of the government and will immediately approve all of our measures. We have to build this relationship, reestablish a relationship of trust in which they understand that our project is best for Brazil. But we know there is a lot of anxiety, so we are asking for a bit of patience.
Brian Mir, TeleSUR, Brasilia.
And Brazil's federal police summoned former far-right President Jair Bolsonaro to testify on Wednesday, April 26, regarding the violent attacks by thousands of his radical supporters against the seats of power in Brasilia. Bolsonaro's statement, which was ordered last week by the Supreme Court of Judge Alexandre de Moraes, within 10 days, serves one of the 4 investigations opened by the federal police, which focuses on the intellectual authorship of the invasion that vandalized the iconic buildings of the presidential Planalto Palace, the National Congress, and the highest court in the capital. On Wednesday night, the Supreme Federal Tribunal indicted the first 100 Bolsonaristas denounced by the prosecutor's office, who will answer in court for crimes such as attempted coup d'etat, criminal association, terrorism, or destruction of protected patrimony in the iconic Brazilian capital. The UN Refugee Agency and the International Organization for Migration in Peru warned on Thursday about the situation of vulnerability of a group of migrants in the Peruvian city of Tacna on the border with Chile. The international organizations supporting asylum seekers and refugees indicated that a group of people have been stranded in Tacna without food, water, lodging, or health assistance since last February. These organizations also denounced that there have been cases of sexual abuse, increasing the risk for girls, women, and the LGBTQI+ community. On late February, Chile began a military deployment in some points of the border with Peru and Bolivia for 90 days in order to increase control of the irregular entry of migrants into its territory. And Federico Augusti, a representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Peru, warned that the risks for people who are stranded at the southern border are increasing, and also highlighted the importance of giving identity documents to asylum seekers for security reasons and for their integration into society.
On the migrants stranded in Tacna City, the risks for people who are stranded at the border are increasing. Many don't have the resources to be able to go to a hotel or have accommodation, so they end up in public spaces as in parks. This generates a lot of tension with the community and also generates difficulties of all kinds: hygiene problems, food problems, climate problems. Practically none of the people have that passport and that visa, so there are discussions, and probably the countries have to agree on whether they would make some exceptions, especially on humanitarian basis.
Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Chinese government on Friday urged Western powers not to interfere in Moscow and Beijing relations and pointed out that third parties have no right to meddle in their bilateral relations. According to China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin, his nation and Russia have developed a new type of relations based on respect, peaceful coexistence, and mutually advantageous cooperation, while asserting that these relations differ from the U.S. practice of creating confrontational blocs. Wenbin reaffirmed that China has maintained an objective and fair position on the Ukrainian crisis, thus promoting peace negotiations and playing a constructive role in these efforts. Now we move on to other topics. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said on Friday that NATO is continuing on a course aimed at absorbing Ukraine and drawing it into the alliance. Peskov made the statement in a conference call with reporters regarding Thursday's remarks by NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg about NATO member countries agreeing to incorporate Ukraine into the alliance in the future. Peskov said Stoltenberg's remarks reflected NATO's anti-Russian course and proved that Russian President Vladimir Putin was right to send troops into Ukraine, that he was safeguarding Russia's interest and the need to ensure its security. Peskov also said Moscow is facing an aggressive bloc that sees Russia as an enemy and that jeopardizes the country's security. The Danish Maritime Authority on Friday lifted restrictions on shipping in the waters near the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea. Representatives of the department said the passage of ships in the area no longer poses a danger. The restrictions were lifted on the recommendation of the Danish Energy Agency. However, the Maritime Authority advised against anchoring, fishing or working on the seabed within 1 nautical mile, 1.85 kilometers off the gas leak. Recently, U.S. journalist Seymour Hersh claimed that the United States is responsible for the Nord Stream pipeline explosions. Hersh said that the operation was prepared for several months and involved representatives of the U.S. political elite and the president himself, Joe Biden. In Germany, the railway and transport unions are staging protests on Friday to exert pressure on the current collective bargaining agreement negotiations. The transport unions convened the members of the 50 companies involved in the negotiation of the collective bargaining agreement, which has been in process since late February. The first offer from the employer's side consisted of a one-off payment of €2,500 tax-free and a linear increase, which is the first 12 months could add up to 11%. However, the proposal was considered insufficient and was followed by a strike that paralyzed rail traffic throughout the country for 24 hours.
The strike of the Railway and Transport Union (EVG) has been going on since the early hours of the morning. There are almost no trains running throughout Germany. EVG has again called on employees of all occupational groups to strike. Under these circumstances, it is not possible to set up a replacement timetable, as is possible with a strike of the train drivers alone.
On Friday, UK Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Robb resigned following an independent investigation into complaints that he bullied civil servants. Robb was appointed Deputy Prime Minister under prior Head of State Boris Johnson, and he briefly took charge of the government when Johnson was hospitalized with COVID-19 in April 2020. His resignation announcement comes the day after Prime Minister Rishi Sunak received findings into 8 formal complaints regarding Robb's abusive behavior towards staff members while serving as Deputy Prime Minister and as Britain's Foreign Secretary and Brexit Secretary. Robb, age 49, who is also Justice Secretary, says the report is flawed and that the inquiry sets a dangerous precedent by setting the threshold for bullying very low. Robb has denied claims he belittled and demeaned his staff. He said he behaved professionally at all times, but was honoring his word about resigning if the bullying complaints were upheld.
I think we can ignore this issue.
And the resignation of UK's Deputy Prime Minister is regarded by some as a symptom of larger issue, as Keir Starmer, Labour Party leaders, points to sequels of the flawed authority of Boris Johnson.
What I think this shows is the continual weakness of the Prime Minister, because there's a double weakness here. He should never have appointed him in the first place, along with other members of the Cabinet that shouldn't have been appointed. And then he didn't sack him. And even today, it's Robb who resigns rather than the Prime Minister who acts. And I think, we're here at Middlesbrough College. I've been talking to the next generation of NHS staff. They desperately want to talk about the future of the NHS. And here we are talking about these weaknesses at the top of the Tory party. And I think, in the end, after 13 years, it just demonstrates that no matter how many times you change the person at the top, you've essentially got a party that just can't deliver, just can't govern. What I think...
Now we move on to other topics. Strong winds and heavy rains that battered the southern Turkey city of Kahramanmaraş. According to reports, hurricane-force winds swept away tents and smashed several of the temporary shelters, hurling pieces of the roofs of the affected buildings into the air. According to the official, the storm left 50 people injured, none of them with serious injuries. According to the health minister, the storm toppled a temporary camp inhabited by victims of the early February earthquakes, leaving one dead and dozens injured. TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries using StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy our Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. On Friday, in Sudan, the clashes intensified between the army and the Rapid Support Forces. Since the beginning of the conflict, there are more than 600 dead and thousands injured, according to local sources. According to the reports, 70% of the hospitals in the capital are inoperative due to the fighting. The United Nations called on the parties to comply with a ceasefire for 3 days on the occasion of the festival Muslim at the end of Ramadan. However, efforts to stop the hostilities have failed. The situation in Sudan has reached such a point that around 20,000 Sudanese have flooded to Chad since the fighting outbreak last Saturday. In large parts of the Muslim world mark the end of the fasting month of Ramadan, while ushering in the holiday of Eid al-Fitr. In this sense, Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's holiest shrines, and other Muslim countries have announced the holiday of Eid al-Fitr, marking the end of the Ramadan fast on Friday. In some other countries, authorities have said the holiday will start on Saturday. The timing of Eid al-Fitr is determined by the sighting of the crescent moon in accordance with the Muslim lunar calendar. The holiday is normally celebrated with family gatherings. Likewise, authorities in Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Jordan, Palestine, and Sudan also announced the start of Eid al-Fitr on Friday. However, the India Union Muslim League said the holiday will be celebrated on Saturday in India, adding the moon was not sighted on Thursday. Meanwhile, as part of the ceremonies, thousands of Palestinians gathered in Al-Zaraya Square in Gaza City to pray at the start of the Muslim holiday of Eid al-Fitr that marks the end of Ramadan. The daytime fasting month of Ramadan is one of the 5 pillars of the Islam. Observant Muslims refrain from eating and drinking from dawn to dusk and traditionally gather with family and friends to break their fast in the evening. It is also a time for prayer, with the faithful converging in large numbers of mosques, especially at night. Also, the people of Afghanistan celebrated Eid al-Fitr and offered Eid prayer amid tight security to mark the end of the fasting month Ramadan on Friday. No security incident has been reported, and security forces personnel have been deployed around mosques and sensitive areas elsewhere in the country to thwart possible security threats. Prayer leaders in their sermons, besides praying for lasting peace and security in their homeland, also urged the establishment to create job opportunities to reduce poverty in Afghanistan. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.